Should a football player train like a swimmer? Should a basketball player train like a fighter? Every sport is different, meaning every single sport needs the right form of endurance and cardio for them to become elite. We're gonna cover all the endurance that every single athlete needs, and we're gonna start right now. What would endurance work be like without discussing running? What we identify as classical endurance inside of garage strength program design is typically where long, slow distance is gonna fall. Long, slow distance will be running a 5K, running a 10K, running even a half marathon, maybe even up to a marathon if you're training for a marathon. But this often is gonna be dependent upon the individual's ability. Now, when we're talking about sports performance and durational strength characteristics, that's where the endurance training becomes much more nuanced. It's not as simple as just doing that long, slow distance. So in garage strength program design, we break down traditional resistance-based training into 5 key components for durational strength characteristics. And that's gonna start with blast impulse. So that's being really, really explosive very, very quickly. That's gonna be sustained impulse, which might be about 10 to 15 seconds. Then we're gonna get into sustained power. Think about if we have an athlete like a wrestler who's going through some type of scramble. That's gonna be potentially 20 to 30 seconds. And then finally, we're gonna get into power endurance and classical endurance. So each sport uses at least 1 to 2 forms of endurance-based work. So strength training to improve your specific endurance type is absolutely vital. And that's exactly why inside of our strength training app, Peak Strength, we've created programming to target the specific problem areas for your specific sport. You're gonna be given a planned out program with specific exercises, rep ranges, and weights. And that's gonna be all dependent upon whether or not you're in or out of season. Peak Strength is out right now, so head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store to download Peak Strength and get those 5 free workouts that we're gonna give you so you can start that journey. But for this video, let's start with honing in on that sustained power output. And again, that's gonna be about 10 to 30 seconds of interval style endurance-based focus. Then if we look at power endurance, that's gonna be 30 seconds all the way up to potentially 2 minutes of actual work. Think about David Rudisha breaking the world record in the 800 meters in 1 minute and 41 seconds. He needs to have a lot of sustained power output. And then we bring in classical endurance. Classical endurance is gonna be anything over that 2-minute timeline. Think about running, again, that 5K, running a 10K, maybe running a marathon. And so if we're gonna talk about durational strength and endurance, we have to talk about the energy systems involved. And I want to dispel a small myth here. Coaches love to say that anything under 15 seconds, that's gonna be the alactic energy system. And anything over that 15 seconds, all the way up to say a minute or a minute and a half, that's gonna be the glycolytic energy system. And then anything over top of that minute and a half, that's gonna be our aerobic capacity. That's gonna be our aerobic system. But there's something that we have to bring up. I'm standing here right now using my aerobic system. We are always using oxygen. The body is not only breathing in oxygen, we also need to be effectively transporting that oxygen to then be used as well as possible. This is why when shot putters just spend a little bit extra time doing endurance-based work, very low endurance-based work, they're able to recover faster and actually get stronger. So that first key, endurance-based training increases cardiac output. Your heart gets stronger. And this is where we're gonna see a direct correlation with sprint work, with interval work. There's an immediate impact on that cardiac output. There's an immediate impact on your mitochondrial respiration. So that second key, endurance-based training, is gonna increase that blood plasma volume. And we can even see blood plasma volume increase from heat exposure. So these 2 aspects will play a major role in overall endurance-based training. And then that third key factor is that endurance training will increase hemoglobin levels. There's a direct correlation with increasing hemoglobin levels and improving your VO2 max. Long, slow distance and interval work will be a major factor at play, which will lead to that improvement in your VO2 max. Now let's look at some key factors that fall under different sporting umbrellas, and we're gonna even dial in on specific sports and their sports specificity work and the interplay that that has on durational strength characteristics. Certain sports will have an aspect of intervals, so we have to find a ratio of how long someone's doing an action, how long their rest period is going to be, and then how long until that action occurs again. And then finally, there also has to be an aspect around body weight. Is there a load that the individual is working against? Think about football, think about wrestling. These are going to have those body weight aspects. If the athletic action inside of the sport takes less than 20 seconds, there's going to be a much higher degree of interval work. And if we're talking about a sport like CrossFit or football, and the load that you're opposing is going to be greater than your body weight, then there needs to be a decent amount of traditional resistance-based training as well. In other sports, such as wrestling, there's a lot of endurance work being done on the mat or inside of that competitive practice area. A lot of endurance might be triggered just by doing their sport skill. So we can train endurance to a point, but we have to be aware of what they're doing with their specific practice. And this is where we're gonna go a little bit deeper into that interval ratio. So interval ratio sports like CrossFit, football, wrestling, these are all gonna be based around doing endurance work at least twice a week. That's gonna provide us that golden ticket to endurance work. So in programming frequency, we also have to factor in there might be interval work done within that sport specificity. So take something like football. If they're doing 7-on-7 scrimmages at a faster pace, that can take care of that interval frequency. If you have a wrestler and they're doing a live drilling session or they're doing flow wrestling for 25 to 30 minutes, that's probably also going to be factored into your overall interval programming. And in addition to this endurance-based training, there should be at least 2 to 3 days a week of overall resistance-based training as well. Because remember, strength matters when we're physically pushing opponents or barbells around for our own competitive edge. And then to round out that endurance work, I recommend at least 2 sessions per week of heat exposure. That's gonna help improve that overall endurance, along with a couple little tidbits of LSD work. Let's say 20 to 30 minutes of easy LSD. And then having an opponent is one thing, but what about when it's just you, yourself, and you? Like running the 100 or the 200 meters. So if we're looking at non-opponent interval-based sports, we should be doing interval work about 1 to 2 times a week. And one of those factors we have to remember is that if we're looking at a sport like sprinting, a lot of sport-specific work for the sprinter will actually be the endurance-based work. To build the needed power for explosiveness, for twitchiness, for just power output, impulse expression, these athletes should be doing 2 sessions a week of resistance-based training, also with some type of body weight training work on top of that. That could be athlete-based training. And if further endurance-based training is absolutely needed, these individuals could round out that entire week of training with some simple LSD, something that's not going to beat them up. But this is usually covered by their sport-specific practice. All that interval training is fine and good. It's absolutely fantastic. But if we're gonna talk further about endurance training, we have to talk about aerobic capacity. And if we're gonna be looking at that durational strength characteristic, that's going to be classical endurance. So classical endurance sports is gonna be 40+ seconds of actual action, actual activity within that sport without an opponent. The clock being in your head, your opponents and what they're doing being in your head doesn't count. So with classical endurance, we still should be doing sprint work every 8 to 10 days. And typically these sports are technical, but the endurance work is actually going to be done during the sport-specific work. Think about a distance runner, think about a swimmer. When they're doing their technique work or when they're actually running, they're getting their actual endurance training done. So this could be tempo runs, swims, biking 2 times a week. These are all aspects that are gonna play a major role in us embracing that pain cave. So to prevent monotony, let's take a sport like biking. This individual who is a biker could also be doing something that's long, slow distance once a week on their time off. So they could be going for a hike. They could be going for some type of easy LSD work. They could even be going swimming to lead to an improvement in their overall endurance. That's where a specific sport-based program, like the ones that we provide inside of Peak Strength, will also help break up the monotony of classical endurance training. And resistance-based training does need to happen for these specific classical endurance athletes, but the volume comparative to a CrossFitter or to a weightlifter will feel like it's absolutely nothing. However, those classical endurance athletes still should be doing resistance-based training about twice a week, around 30 minutes each session. So head over to peakstrength.app or your device's app store to try Peak Strength for free. So lastly, mobility work should be done on a regular basis to help keep that fascia limbers, to help keep your joints nice and stable. And that about covers it, except for one specific sport. One newish sport that goes after fitness connoisseurs the world over. And that is the sport of CrossFit. Being that CrossFit needs preparation for virtually every single durational strength characteristic imaginable, it requires a scalpel-like precision. Namely, you need to find weak points through various testing protocols. So upon discovering those weak points, we're gonna look at power outputs down, impulse expression is weak, VO2 max is down. You find which one is going to be down the most, and then for the next 8 to 12 weeks, you hammer that specific type of endurance that's gonna help pull that weakness up. And then as the season approaches, for most CrossFit athletes, that's going to mean the open. From 8 to 12 weeks out, now we start to really focus on that individual strengths. In the end, you've gotta know the physiology. You have to know the aspects needed. Push the training accordingly to the sport and then bask in those endurance gains. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.